Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Actuary podcast, produced on behalf of the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, the IFOA. I'm John Watkins, a financial journalist and your host for this episode. Our three great guests this episode are Paul Sweeting, the new IFOA president, Alexandra Miles, a pensions expert and enthusiast, and Bart Hubie, an actuary who works in sports analysis. To kick us off, we have in the studio with us Paul Sweeting. He's the new president of the IFOA, as I just mentioned, and was recently interviewed in the Actuary's July-August issue. Well, welcome, Paul. Thanks very much for joining us in the studio and in the UK. And I say that because for the past 7 years or so, you've been living and working in the Middle East, working out of Riyadh and living in Dubai. Tell us a bit about that and how that setup came to be.
Well, I started working in Riyadh about 7 years ago, as you say, when I was asked to join Hassana as Chief Risk Officer. And Riyadh has changed an awful lot in the last 7 years. And things like schools, there just wasn't the choice you had in Dubai back then. So the family settled in Dubai. I worked in Riyadh, initially doing a weekly commute. I'd do weekends in Dubai and working in Riyadh. And then COVID came along and I didn't go anywhere for about a year. Initially nowhere from Riyadh and then nowhere from Dubai. And after that, because remote working was so much easier, I tended to do a week in Riyadh and a week in Dubai.
Right. And how often are you back in the UK now? And how do you find the travel? I mean, what do you do to while away the time in between those two destinations?
I spend a lot of the time sleeping between the two destinations because I often get overnight flights.
Yeah.
So I've got my routine there fairly well set up that, my eyes are closed before the wheels are up. But I tend to be back about once a month. I'm lucky in that most of my meetings tend to be grouped fairly closely together, so I can come in for a week or less and do all the meetings I need to and then go back to Dubai.
Brilliant. And you've just become the new IFOA president, starting a term of 2 years now, which is a change. How are you feeling about that, and what made you want to take on that role?
I'm feeling very excited about it and very optimistic. What made me want to take on the role? There's a few things. I mean, I could see there'd been a lot of changes that had happened in terms of governance, and I could see there were quite a few challenges that I knew already existed and I could see could be coming up in terms of things like education. And the idea came initially because some people asked if I would stand and suggested that I could be helpful, that my skills would be useful, because I've got a lot of experience of governance, of working in large organizations and helping bring about organizational change. I've got the technical skill, which is useful on the education side, and I've got the education background as well. So, because I've had a fairly low boredom threshold over the years and worked in quite a few different areas, a lot of those tick boxes for things that will be useful as president over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and that 2-year tenure is beneficial, presumably, in the sense that it allows you to achieve a bit more and gives you a bit longer to implement some of those things that you want to do.
It does. I mean, there's pros and cons with the 2-year. I mean, the biggest con is that it requires someone that can give up 2 years to do it and whose employer is happy for them to give up 2 years to do it. The advantage is, you're right, you've got greater continuity, although I've always said that I'm not planning on going into the presidency with a big grand plan to push my own agenda. I want to be someone that makes things happen, helps things get done, facilitates as much as anything else. But I think you're right that there will be greater continuity there with the 2-year term. So I'm looking forward to being able to help make sure things happen over that period.
It's relatively unusual for the IFOA president not to be based in the UK, but that presumably gives you the opportunity to truly represent IFOA globally and to connect with members wherever they are around the world. Is that something that's important in this role?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, half of the membership is outside the UK. Now, admittedly, most of the fellows are in the UK, so most of the students are overseas, but it's important that we do connect with all of our membership. And where I am in Dubai means I'm very close to India and Southeast Asia, where we have a lot of members, a lot of students. We also have a growing number of students in Africa, and it's easy to get to see them as well from Dubai. And I think that is a useful part of where I'm based. And as my frequent flyer account will show, I'm actually pretty close to the UK as well. It's very easy for me to get back here and see our members, as well as coming back for the various board and council meetings, to actually spend time with our UK membership and hear from them what matters to them.
We touched a bit on what appeals to you about the role, but tell us a bit about what's on your wish list and your to-do list for the next 2 years.
My to-do list is really to get things working well, to get things working smoothly, to bed in the governance changes, to make sure that the council, the board and the executive are working well together and understanding each other well. That's one of the main things for me, is to try to make sure that those relationships work and that the governance structure works. Other things which I think are important are areas like education, the syllabus, making sure that that is not only up to date, but the process for changing it is a bit more agile than it has been in the past. So we can quickly reflect changes that are coming through in theory into what people are learning. So I think that those are two of the key areas that I'll be trying to concentrate on.
Brilliant. And you've had such vast experience as an actuary, risk, strategy, research, many senior roles. You've also been involved on the volunteering side, including 2 stints on the IFOA Council. Which of your many roles has had the biggest impact on you and why?
That's a difficult question, because many of the important roles have been because of some previous role which has put me in that position. So one of the ones which had the greatest impact was my work at JP Morgan Asset Management, where I was head of the strategy group in London, covering basically the world ex-US. And that was really important because it meant that I built relationships with senior people in sovereign wealth funds and national pension schemes around the world, which ultimately led to my job in the Middle East, because that was from a relationship I built there. So that was very impactful. I'm not sure that I would have had that job if I hadn't had my professorship at Kent, which just helped me build analytical rigor in my research and meant that the research that I was putting out through my role at JP Morgan Asset Management was more robust. So that was certainly a very important part of my career, the academic side. And, going the other way to my work in Saudi Arabia, I mean, I was building the risk system for the asset manager of the National Pension Scheme, and I was seconded to the National Pension Scheme to lead their risk division. So I was responsible for the security of the pensions of the entire country. So that's fairly impactful. So somewhere along those three, I'd say is the most impactful, but it's difficult to say which.
Yeah, you mentioned your stint in academia there, and you were teaching actuarial science at the University of Kent for about a decade. You talked about the impact that had on you, but what spurred you on to do that? What tempted you into academia?
It's something I'd always wanted to do. I mean, I had this slightly naive idea of what academia could be, because what I've always really enjoyed is research. Ever since I was an undergraduate, I really liked, that's really sad, I really like getting hold of a data set and analysing it and seeing what I can get out of it. And I always find that really interesting. So I decided, once I had qualified, to try to put myself on the path to become a university professor. So I did a master's by research in my spare time, and I did a PhD in my spare time. And fortunately, the number of actuaries that were also PhDs was fairly limited. And that meant that I was in a pretty good position to get a job in academia and allow myself to just sit in a chair and think and do research. And that's not what it's like at all. It's all to do with trying to arrange teaching schedules and marking schedules and things like that. So it was very rewarding, but it's certainly not sitting in an armchair in a corduroy coat thinking deep thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you have a one main tip for actuary students out there, perhaps?
Past papers.
Yeah.
It's not a particularly original one. I mean, it's fine learning the stuff, but you only really know whether you know it when you do questions, and questions uncover the bits that you don't know so well and send you back to learn those bits a little bit harder. So past papers is, I would say it's the only way, but it's the most reliable way to make sure you do know what you think you know.
Yeah, and what was it that led you to become an actuary yourself back in the 90s? What tempted you into that?
Well, there's a story. I had a summer job at an investment bank called Claremont Benson, which was bought up by Dresner quite a few years ago. I actually, on the way here, I cycled past the site of that old building, which is now the walkie-talkie. And after about 2 or 3 weeks there, the head of the securities research team came back from his very long holiday, and he was hugely well respected, and everybody thought that he was great. And he was head of insurance research, and it was supposed to be even then a no smoking office, but he still lit up a big cigar every now and then, wandering around smoking this cigar, and everybody just thought he was amazing. And he was an actuary, and I thought, I want to do what you do. So that was my initial fairly poor idea to wanting to become an actuary. Then I looked into it. I thought, actually, this does fit quite well with what I'm good at. So maybe I will do the exams and then go off into investment banking. And I never actually made it to investment banking because I found I actually really enjoyed ordinary actuarial work on the pensions and then the investment side.
And just to round things off a bit, can you tell us a bit about your life in the Middle East? Do you enjoy the culture there, and what do you do to relax outside of work?
Yeah, I mean, the trying to talk about the culture in the Middle East is slightly misleading because there are lots of different cultures right across the region. So the culture in Riyadh is going to be very different to the culture in Muscat, in Oman. Even within the UAE, the culture in Abu Dhabi is very different to Dubai, and Dubai is much more cosmopolitan than many other parts. And there are some common threads across the country. I mean, family is very important there. Relationships are very important. And to be successful there, you have to recognize that building strong relationships is the way to do that. But in terms of what I do when I'm not working, a lot of my time is spent doing sport, triathlon training. There's excellent cycling facilities in Dubai and running facilities and swimming. So I do a lot of triathlon training and a lot of miles.
Yeah, good stuff. And just finally, you're speaking at the IFOA's Middle East Conference this September. What are you looking forward to getting out of that event?
I'm really looking forward to seeing as many actuaries from the region gathered in one place as possible and getting the actuaries together with regulators, policymakers, and other senior figures in the pensions and insurance world there. It's going to be great.
Yeah, well, we've enjoyed having you here in London for the podcast, and we look forward to seeing a lot more of you over the next couple of years.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. Well, thank you to Paul for a brilliant conversation, enabling us to find out a bit more about what drives him and motivates him. And of course, you can read the interview with Paul in the July-August issue or online at theactuary.com to learn a little bit more about him. Next up, I'm joined by Alexandra Miles. She's here to talk about her passion for pensions and some new developments in that area too. Alexandra, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, John.
It's really good to have you. So you're a pensions actuary at L&G focused on DC funds, but you have a passion for pensions that is far wider and in a social sense. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, pensions are a fantastic indicator of border inequalities built up over a lifetime. And I've been privileged during my time at L&G to have access to data on our clients and their members. And I started looking at the gender pensions gap and were really startled by the difference between the pensions that men and women were building up. And this set me on a journey of discovery, on which I quite quickly came to the conclusion there were a number of structural and systemic and social reasons behind the pensions inequalities that I could see in the data that I was looking at. And since then, I've been unpicking in an effort to understand how these might come together and provide the final result that we see.
Yeah, interesting. And there's a lot of headlines and concerns around pensions at the moment, not just in the UK, but and around state pension age, around inadequate pension pots, about populations living far longer and what that means for pensions. What do you think we need to prioritise in terms of all of the concerns around pensions at the moment?
I mean, that's a really difficult question. I'm not sure I could prioritise just one. What I enjoy doing is studying the interconnectedness between all of those different issues, which are all very big picture ideas and themes. The overall ask, I think, should be prioritising fairness, financial independence, and financial resilience for all. And then having a think about assessing and securing a dignified baseline for everybody. What does good look like? What are we striving for? And then making sure that we continue to build towards a fairer and more sustainable pension system moving forward, acknowledging and taking account of the demographic realities that we all face, and also assessing the roles of state, employer, and the individual in meeting that baseline.
Yeah, there's a lot of ducks to get in a row for something that's so complex, I guess. This July, the Institute for Fiscal Studies published its review of pensions, and the IFOA contributed to that. Can you sum up some of the key findings for us, some of the headline findings?
Yeah, the IFOA was an advisory group member organisation, which was fantastic to see. And the main find is this was a major 2-year project led by the IFS and the Aberdeen Financial Fairness Trust. And it was aimed at assessing the UK pension system and proposing reforms to inform retirement outcomes for future generations. And so the key problems identified were inadequate savings, insufficient cover in terms of the number of people that are building up a pension, uncertainty over the future of the triple lock, and then finally the fact that many members had fragmented pension pots in many different places. And within the report, there were big ideas for reform, such as the state pension guarantee, automatic enrolment overhaul, so for example, lowering the age to 18 and increasing the eligibility age to 74, increasing contribution rates for those that can afford it, so middle and higher income households and individuals, and then also having a think about contributions and lowering the salary that contributions start accruing from to £4,000. So quite a lot. And on top of that, there was a look at self-employed, which has been lots of noise in the industry about the fact that self-employed are not building up a pension. And then thinking about decumulation and better retirement management. It's the play between income drawdown and annuity, and when each of those or a combination of both might make the most sense for individuals. And within it, they also covered public sentiment and the feeling that public are keen to have a sustainable system moving forward that's fair for all, which makes sense.
Brilliant. And, we talked about your wider passion for pensions. You're chair of the IFOA Pensions Gap Working Party, and you've now founded an Ageing Populations Working Party. What inspired you to get involved with those things, and what sort of work will those panels be doing?
Yeah, so I was privileged to be asked by the Pensions Board to chair the new Ageing Populations Working Party. And it really came from the success that we've had with the Pensions Gap Working Party that I founded and now chair, and has been running for about 2 years. And sort of where we started thinking about the kind of structural, social, economic consequences of some of these big picture themes, it made sense to have a look more broadly at ageing populations. So we have just kicked off the Working Party, and we have had a look and pulled together some research looking at the underlying factors, so themes such as declining fertility rates. We have migration, and another one we're looking at is life expectancy, so both total and healthy, and the implications those factors all have on ageing populations. So within the Working Party, we're looking to build a model, because we are actuaries, so that we can interrogate and play with the assumptions behind those underlying structural themes and factors, and have a look at the consequences on ageing populations, and then take that a stage further to have a think about, with that state of play in ageing populations, how we might, as a society make sure that everybody has fairer pensions and more sustainable pension system and broader system actually.
Yeah, agreed. And all of that is obviously keeping you very busy. You mentioned you've got your day job as well. But you've also teamed up with fellow actuary James Smith to produce a report of your own, which I think is launching later this year, which is called Retirement Reimagined. Can you tell us a bit about that and what the key messages from that will be?
Yeah, it's quite a grand title, isn't it?
It is.
So this was a culmination of a lecture which we both delivered last November. The lecture was called Bloomfeld Lecture, and it was in memory of Patrick Bloomfeld. And we hope we did his memory credit. And so we wanted to have a permanent record of the thoughts, the research work that we put into delivering that lecture. And in the report that you're right does launch later this year, we're looking to extend a few of the things that we touched on. So the idea is reframing retirement not as a cliff edge event, but as a phase. So we talk about 4 phases in the report. We focus on 2 case studies. So a lady called Renee and a man called Paul, representing people at different levels of income and wealth. And we look at how they're faring in the current system and what might make both of them get to that kind of baseline of a dignified retirement, what changes might be made. We also cover the price of dignity using the great work of Professor Matt Padley and his team, social research team at the University of Loughborough. We look at existing structural inequalities and also have some questions on the future sustainability of the current system.
Fantastic. And we look forward to learning more about that when it comes out. Alexandra, thanks so much for taking us through what is a really complex area with pensions. Well, thank you to Alex for joining us in the studio. It was a very insightful conversation and a brilliant chat. Our last guest this episode is actuary and football fan Bart Hubie, who's here to talk to us about his really interesting work around analysis of football. Bart, thanks so much for joining us. Good to have you here.
Thanks for the invitation. Really looking forward to it.
Really pleased to have you. So let's start by talking a bit about your career. You've been an actuary working at LCP in Winchester for 30 years. That's some longevity in today's numbers. Tell us a little bit about that and what you enjoy about working there.
Yeah, it is. It does seem a long time in some ways, but also it's gone very quickly. LCP's been a great place to work. I think when I joined, we were 150 people in the business. We're nearly 10 times that big. So it's been a really interesting journey. We've actually grown very steadily, and our revenues and profits have grown very steadily over the period. So it's been a gradual evolution, but we are a hugely different business to the one I joined in many ways.
You're a partner and a football fan. You work in 2 distinct areas, which is pensions and the company's sports analytics and advisory service. So just tell us a little bit about those 2 different aspects of your role, and which is your sort of main bread and butter, and which one you enjoy the most, perhaps.
Yeah. So, well, pensions was my main bread and butter for the first 25 years of my time at LCP and over 10 years prior to that. Over the last 7 or 8 years, I've transitioned from pensions into building the sport analytics and advisory business. And I now actually no longer do any pensions work. So my main commercial interest is in building a sport analytics business. It feels so different. Pensions is a mature business. We have a lot of clients who come to LCP. Sport analytics, it very much feels like a startup within the business. So a very different flavour to what I'm doing.
And tell us a bit about the sports analytics services within the business. What does that actually look like?
So we do 2 things now. One is the sort of tech side of the business, and the other is what we call advisory or consultancy. So on the tech side, we've built a platform called Transfer Lab, which is a player recruitment SaaS platform that we have about 30 different clients, 30 different football clubs mainly, some football player agencies. So that's a really interesting piece of technology. We've also got a platform we built for the European Club Association, which is to help football clubs across Europe arrange friendly fixtures more effectively and more efficiently. And then on the advisory side, we're building a service based around the new regulatory regime that's going to come into the football industry in England in the next year or so under the new independent football regulator. So we think football clubs could be run better. We think they're going to need to be run better to fit in with the regulatory regime. And so we think there's a service for us to offer to help clubs.
And how did that come about? Did you foresee a gap in the market, or did a client come to you and say, we're looking to do this, can you help us? How's that spawned within the business?
So it was a bit of a sort of speculative thing about 7 or 8 years ago. We knew we wanted to diversify as a business, use our technological skills in a range of areas. So we've now built it as a business, 3 areas of new technological skills. As I said before, health analytics and energy analytics, and the one I lead, sport analytics. And we sort of thought, no, this is an interesting area. We're not quite sure how we would build that business. So we looked around for a partner, knowing that we are very good with tech, but actually don't really know much about the football industry. So we found a partner called Analytics FC. They're a firm who know a lot about the football industry, are very keen on analytics, but didn't have the ability to build systems. So we've had a relationship with them for 7 or 8 years. And that's been our core sort of interaction with them, has been this platform we call Transfer Lab. And that's sort of how it came about.
Well, when you're deploying those services, when you're helping clients in those areas, is it very much a case of applying what we would call typical actuarial techniques to the data, or are there other areas and other things and techniques that you've had to learn along the way?
I mean, I would say we don't use any typical actuarial techniques. We don't do discounted cash flows. We don't do mortality analysis. But what we do is take on large quantities of data, analyze it, and produce output which needs to be critically assessed in terms of does this mean anything? Is this useful for clients? How do we communicate that to clients? And those are all the skills that I think you learn as an actuary. So while I've moved into a completely different field, and certainly I won't be signing off any of the work I do under TAS standards within the football industry, those actuarial skills that I've built up are hugely valuable in what I do. Yeah.
And any famous clients that you can share with us from? I know you talk broadly about some of the sports that you're working in, but any specific clients?
So on the football club side, West Ham is our longest standing client in this country. Atalanta, a big Italian football club. And then possibly the most exciting one was when we got Santos from Brazil as a client, Pele's club.
Yeah.
So we've got some interesting clubs. And then on the player side, actually our analytics are used to support footballers in negotiating their contracts with clubs. The first client that did that was Kevin De Bruyne about 3 or 4 years ago, so not a bad name there. Most recent client, Miles Lewis-Skelly of your club. So he negotiated his contract with Arsenal in the last few months, using some of our analytic tools. So they're pretty exciting projects.
And presumably those contracts are getting all the more complex and complicated, aren't they now? Because you've got things like IP rights factored in and all sorts of bonus payments and scheduled payments depending on various milestones and things like that. So presumably that enhances the need for the service as the service gets more and more complex.
Indeed, I think for a player to be able to get best value, someone like Miles Lewis-Skelly negotiating a contract for many years at a relatively young age, to be able to look at benchmarking against other players, both from his sort of age level, but also prospectively into the future for those sort of complex requirements. I think, it is hugely valuable. And certainly his agent was very appreciative of the work we did for her.
It's his mum, I think.
It is his mum, indeed.
His mum looks after him, I think. Fascinating stuff. Your teams are Tranmere Rovers and Liverpool. You mentioned mine is Arsenal. Yours are Tranmere Rovers and Liverpool. From where you grew up, I think you're from the Wirral, in the Wirral, right? I understand you did an MBA tailored to the football industry a few years ago as well. Does your involvement in the sport change your enjoyment of it and your experience of watching your teams?
I mean, yes and no, I would say. I actually did the football industry's MBA degree at Liverpool University, so it was nice to sort of go back. And in fact, both my parents were lecturers at the university, so that was a really nice thing to do. The degree the MBA was to do with the finances of football. So I now know a huge amount about the complexities of football finance and PSR, with all those sort of things that are much more in the public domain than they ever used to be. So I think on that side of it, I do a lot of reading, listening to podcasts, etc. And sometimes that does feel like work. Okay, in fact, I watched the Lionesses in their recent victory against Sweden in the Euros when they came back from 2 goals down. And when they got the equaliser, I was jumping off my seat in the way that I always would have done. So still very much excited by watching the game.
Yeah, lots of us were. And do people sort of try to tap into your knowledge a lot? You know, I mean, the sort of sports betting seems to be growing astronomically, and everybody's looking to get an edge. I mean, are your sort of friends and colleagues saying, you know, what do you think about this? You got any tips on this?
So I do get asked that. I think 2 answers to that. One is, you know, I do Football Manager at work and do very badly at that. So clearly that's not helping there. But also, I think if I would be wary of giving tips, because I think football is hugely random game on any particular game. So, you know, if somebody thought I knew what I was talking about in terms of predicting a match result, I wouldn't. I don't bet myself very much, although I am tempted by Tranmere Rovers at 9-1 against for winning League Two this season. So I may well be putting a few pennies on there.
Thank you for a fascinating chat. I really enjoyed that, and good luck to Tranmere at least this season.
Thank you, John, and maybe good luck to Arsenal.
Thanks, Bart. Well, thanks very much to Bart, and indeed, thank you to all of our guests for this episode. And I hope, as always, you've enjoyed listening to it just as much as I've enjoyed speaking to our guests and learning more about them and their work. Do join us again in our next episode coming out after the September-October issue of the magazine, and I look forward to seeing you then.